That night, I watched the man who swore he loved me display his own betrayal like a war trophy. He smiled for the cameras while I bled inside, invisible in the middle of that glittering crowd, and I swear, he never imagined that would be the last time he'd control anything in my life. Because when you lose everything, you discover there was nothing to lose, and that's when a strength is born that no one can destroy. A strength that comes from the deepest, darkest place inside you, where all the pain you've swallowed and all the tears you've held back finally transform into something unbreakable, something that no lie, no betrayal, no humiliation can ever take away from you again. Before I continue, I need to ask you something. If you've ever felt this pain of loving someone who made you feel small, invisible, insufficient, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. I want you to know you're not alone in this. This story is mine, but it could also be yours. And if it is, I want you to understand that on the other side of this pain exists a version of you that's stronger than any lie they tried to make you believe. A version that doesn't need anyone's validation to know her worth. A version that has learned the most important lesson of all, that the only love that truly matters is the love you give yourself. Winter had already arrived in Seoul when everything began to crumble. Not the calendar winter, but that cold that lives inside your chest when you realize something is wrong, but you pretend it isn't. That cold that seeps into your bones slowly, day by day, until one morning you wake up and realize you've been freezing for months without even noticing. The wind cut through the streets like sharp blades, and the smell of roasted chestnuts mixed with steam rising from food stalls on the corners of Hongdae. Street vendors called out to passers-by, their voices hoarse from the cold, offering hot drinks and warm pastries to anyone brave enough to face the biting wind. The city was wrapped in that particular gray that only Seoul winters have. A gray that somehow makes everything look both beautiful and melancholy at the same time. I lived alone in a small apartment on the 14th floor of an old building in Mapo, one of those places where the wallpaper is peeling in the corners, and the heater makes a strange rattling noise every dawn that sounds like someone tapping on metal pipes. The building was old enough that the elevator sometimes got stuck between floors, and the hallways always smelled faintly of kimchi and cigarette smoke, but I liked it there. It was mine. A space that belonged to me and me alone, where I could close the door and shut out the world. From the window, I could see car lights reflecting on the Han River like fallen stars on wet asphalt, creating patterns that changed every few seconds as traffic moved in waves below. And in those moments, even with the biting cold outside, even with my breath fogging up the glass, I thought life could still be beautiful. That despite everything going wrong, despite the loneliness that sometimes felt like a physical weight on my chest, there was still something worth holding on to. Until Minjun began to disappear from me. Not physically, not all at once. It was a slow, painful process. Like those wounds you don't notice until they're already too deep. Like when you cut yourself on paper and don't realize it until you see blood. He was still there, beside me, sleeping in my bed, taking up 3/4 of the mattress the way he always did. His clothes still hung in my closet. His toothbrush still stood next to mine in the bathroom. His shoes still cluttered the entryway. We still shared Sunday breakfast, sitting across from each other at my tiny kitchen table. Him scrolling through his phone while I pretended not to notice how distant he'd become. But something in him had left. The look, the presence, the desire. The way he used to look at me when I entered a room, like I was the most important thing in his world. That look had vanished somewhere along the way. It was as if he had left only an empty shell of who he was, or who I thought he was. A mannequin wearing his face, going through the motions of our relationship without any of the emotion that once made it real. Minjun was a man with a strong presence, one of those who enters a place and makes time stop just by existing. Tall, easily 6 feet or more, with broad shoulders that filled out his expensive suits perfectly. He had that kind of confidence that comes from someone who's always had doors open for him, who's never had to fight for anything because everything has always been handed to him on a silver platter. His hair was always perfectly styled, swept back with just enough product to look effortless. His jawline could have been carved from marble. When he smiled, which he did often in public, his teeth were impossibly white and straight. He was the kind of handsome that turned heads on the street, that made waitresses blush and stumble over their words. When we met, I was working as a graphic designer at a small agency in the Itaewon neighborhood, one of those cramped offices on the 3rd floor of a building with no elevator, where we worked on old computers and survived on instant coffee and deadline-induced panic. I wasn't senior enough to attend client meetings usually, but our lead designer had called in sick that day, and my boss had no choice but to send me in his place. I remember feeling terrified, clutching my portfolio folder so hard my knuckles turned white, rehearsing my presentation in my head over and over during the taxi ride. He showed up there for a meeting about the visual identity for his company, Han Corporation, a startup investment firm that was in meteoric rise. All the business magazines were writing about him, the young CEO who'd built an empire before turning 30, who'd turned a small investment firm into one of the most talked-about companies in Seoul. I remember the way he looked at my artwork, leaning forward with his elbows on the conference table, his eyes moving slowly across each page of my portfolio. That silent attention that makes you feel truly seen, like every line you'd drawn and every color choice you'd made actually mattered to someone. Most clients barely glanced at the work before making demands and criticisms, but he studied each piece carefully, asked thoughtful questions about my design philosophy, wanted to know the story behind certain choices. At the end of the meeting, he asked for my number, said he wanted to discuss more details about the project. I gave it to him, trying to keep my hand from shaking as I wrote it down on his business card. But when he called me 3 days later, it wasn't about the project at all. It was to invite me to dinner. "I can't stop thinking about you," he said, his voice warm through the phone. "I'd like to get to know you better. Not as a designer, but as Jiwoo." I fell in love too fast. Maybe because he made me feel important. Maybe because I was tired of being invisible, of being the quiet girl in the corner who did good work, but never got recognized for it. Or maybe because, for the first time in my 27 years, someone who seemed completely out of my league was choosing me without hesitation, not settling for me, not making do with me, but actively pursuing me like I was something precious and rare. In the first few weeks, he took me to restaurants where I had to Google the dress code before going, where waiters whispered in English and French, and the menus had no prices listed. Plates came decorated like works of art, with microgreens and edible flowers and sauces drizzled in perfect geometric patterns. He ordered wine that cost more than my monthly rent, talking knowledgeably with the sommelier about tannins and terroir and vintage years. He gave me gifts I would never ask for, and certainly couldn't afford myself. Silk scarves from Italian designers whose names I couldn't pronounce, perfumes from French parfumeries with bottles that looked like crystal sculptures, delicate earrings wrapped in little blue boxes from Tiffany & Co. He said I was different from the other women he knew, that Seoul was full of women who only cared about status and money, who saw him as a walking wallet or a stepping stone to a better life. But I had something genuine, something rare. I didn't ask him for anything, didn't demand expensive gifts or lavish dates. I was content to just be with him, to listen to him talk about his dreams and struggles, to offer comfort when the pressure of running a company became too much. "You're my refuge, Jiwoo," he told me one night, his head in my lap as we sat on my worn couch. "You're the only real thing in my life," and I believed him. God help me. I believed every word. But that night, everything would change. For 3 years, I lived with this man between expensive dinners and promises whispered in the dark, and a constant feeling that something in him would always be out of my reach. 3 years of trying to be enough, of molding myself into whatever shape I thought he needed, of swallowing my own needs and wants to accommodate his. Minjun was like a shadow that moves too fast to be touched, like water that slips through your fingers no matter how tightly you try to hold on. Even when he was beside me, even when his body was right there next to mine, I felt he was far away, always thinking about something else, somewhere else, someone else. His mind was constantly occupied with business, with strategies and negotiations, and numbers that I didn't understand. He'd be in the middle of a conversation with me, and his phone would buzz, and I'd watch his eyes glaze over as he mentally left the room, already composing emails in his head or calculating profit margins. He said I was his calm, the only constant in the middle of the business war. "You ground me," he'd say when he finally looked up from his phone after 20 minutes of silence. "I don't know what I'd do without you." But I began to wonder if he really saw me, or if I was just another piece on the perfect board he was building, a decorative element in the life he was constructing, like the expensive art he hung on his office walls, or the luxury car he drove, beautiful to look at, but ultimately replaceable. The trips began to increase in the second year of our relationship. First, they were meetings in Busan, quick encounters that lasted a day or two. "I'll be back before you know it," he'd say, kissing my forehead on his way out the door. Then they became investment events in Jeju that stretched into long weekends, conferences in Tokyo that lasted a week, Negotiations in Hong Kong that turned into 2-week affairs. The calendar on his phone was a maze of color-coded blocks, each one representing another place he needed to be that wasn't with me. He always came back with expensive gifts and even more elaborate excuses, each story more detailed than the last. It was exhausting, Jiwoo. Back-to-back meetings from 7 in the morning until midnight. I barely had time to sleep, let alone call you. The time difference made it impossible to find a good moment when we'd both be awake. And I pretended to believe him, because the alternative was too terrifying to face. The alternative was to acknowledge what I already knew deep down, what my gut had been screaming at me for months, that he was slipping through my fingers like sand, and there was nothing I could do to stop it, that the man I loved was slowly, deliberately, pulling away from me, and I was too afraid to confront him about it because confrontation might mean the end, and I wasn't ready for it to end. I wasn't ready to be alone again. The signs were all there, displayed right in front of me like evidence at a crime scene. A persistent feminine perfume on his tie, too sweet and floral to be just from a professional handshake or a polite hug at a business function. I'd smell it when I hugged him hello, that scent that definitely wasn't mine, and I'd feel my stomach drop but say nothing. Messages on his phone that he deleted too quickly, with that nervous movement of someone who knows they're doing something wrong. I'd see his phone light up on the table, see his eyes dart to it, and then to me, calculating whether I'd seen the notification. Then he'd grab it and turn away, his fingers flying across the screen before he'd delete whatever it was and put the phone face down. Just work stuff, he'd say with a casual smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. The lost look when I talked about the future was perhaps the most telling sign of all. I'd mentioned maybe moving in together officially, or what we might do for our 4th anniversary, and his eyes would go distant, unfocused, like he was looking at something far away that I couldn't see. As if he were already living a parallel life that I wasn't part of, a future that didn't include me. I tried to bring up the subject directly a few times, gathering all my courage to ask if something was wrong, if we were okay. But he always deflected with the skill of someone who'd had plenty of practice. You're imagining things, Jiwoo. You're stressed from work. You need to rest, take better care of yourself. Maybe you should see someone about your anxiety. And gradually, insidiously, I began to doubt myself. Was I being paranoid? Was I creating problems where none existed? Was the problem me, not him? Maybe I was too needy, too clingy, too suspicious. Maybe I was sabotaging a good relationship with my insecurities, but I still didn't know what I was about to discover. I started sleeping poorly, waking up at 3 or 4 in the morning with my heart racing, that feeling that something terrible was about to happen pressing down on my chest like a physical weight. I'd lie there in the dark, listening to him breathe beside me, that deep, peaceful breathing of someone with no guilty conscience, and wonder how he could sleep so soundly while I was drowning in anxiety. The insomnia got worse over weeks, until I was barely sleeping 3 hours a night. Dark circles appeared under my eyes, deep purple shadows that no amount of concealer could hide. I lost weight without trying, my appetite disappearing along with my peace of mind. My clothes started hanging loose on my frame, and coworkers asked if I was feeling okay, if I was eating enough. I'd look at him sleeping beside me, his face so peaceful and handsome in the dim light filtering through the curtains, and wonder who this man really was, this person who could lie to me so easily, who could look me in the eyes and tell me he loved me while betraying me with someone else. How did he do it? How did he split himself into 2 people? The loving boyfriend who brought me flowers and kissed me goodnight, and the cheater who was building a whole separate life behind my back. He continued treating me well, at least on the surface. He still took me to dinner every weekend, still kissed my forehead when he left for work, still said, "I love you," before hanging up the phone. But the words had lost their weight. They were just empty sounds, repeated out of habit like a prayer that's been said so many times it loses all meaning. It was on one of those sleepless dawns, at 4:37 in the morning according to the clock on my nightstand, that I grabbed his phone. I know. It's not right. It's not healthy. It's not the kind of thing someone does when they trust their partner. It's an invasion of privacy, a violation of boundaries. If our relationship were healthy, I wouldn't have felt the need to snoop. But the truth is, I didn't trust anymore. That trust had been eroding slowly over months, worn away by all the little lies and inconsistencies and red flags I'd been trying so hard to ignore. And something inside me needed to know, even if it hurt, even if what I found destroyed me. Because not knowing was somehow worse than knowing. The uncertainty was killing me slowly, and I needed concrete proof one way or the other. He was sleeping deeply, his face relaxed and innocent looking in sleep, his breathing slow and even. One arm was thrown over his head, the other resting on his stomach. He looked so peaceful, so trustworthy. How could someone who looked like that be lying to me? I picked up his phone from the nightstand where he always left it, my hands trembling slightly. I typed the password he used for everything. The founding date of his company, October 15th, because of course it would be about that. About his precious business that always came first. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he'd wake up, but he didn't stir. I opened the Messages app, my mouth dry, my palms sweating, and that's when I realized he had never truly loved me. Not the way I deserved, not the way I loved him. Not with that all-consuming, put you first, can't imagine life without you kind of love I'd been giving him for 3 years. The conversations were all there, preserved like evidence of a crime he thought would go unpunished. Messages to a woman named Seo Yeon, hundreds of them, going back months, maybe longer. I couldn't bring myself to scroll all the way to the beginning. Intimate photos that made my stomach turn. Her in lingerie that definitely wasn't bought for a boyfriend she was hiding. Him shirtless in hotel rooms I didn't recognize. Meeting plans laid out in detail. Hotels, restaurants, the times they'd meet. I can get away for 2 hours on Thursday. My meeting in Busan ends at 6. I can see you at 7. She's visiting her mother this weekend. We'll have all of Saturday night. Shared laughs about me. Mocking jokes that felt like knives in my chest. She doesn't suspect anything, he had written just 3 days ago. She's too sweet to notice, too trusting. And she had responded with a laughing emoji and "you're terrible" with a heart emoji. As if my ignorance were funny, as if my love were something amusing to mock. As if I were a joke, a fool, someone so pathetic and blind that I deserved to be deceived. There were inside jokes I didn't understand. References to places they'd been together while I'd thought he was in meetings. Plans for a future that included her, not me. When this is all settled, we can be together properly, he'd written. Just need to handle things carefully. Can't risk the company reputation right now with a messy breakup. I felt the world collapse, felt it crack and crumble beneath me like thin ice giving way. My vision went blurry. My hands started shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. For a moment I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what I was seeing. I got up carefully, moving slowly so as not to wake him, and walked to the bathroom on legs that felt like they might give out at any moment. I closed the door as quietly as I could, turned on the shower to mask any sound, and sat on the cold tile floor with the phone still in my hands, and I cried. Sobbed silently with my hand pressed over my mouth, my whole body shaking with the force of it. Tears streaming down my face, mixing with snot and saliva, ugly crying like I hadn't cried since I was a child. Not because I still cared about him, or maybe I did. Maybe that was the worst part, that even knowing what he'd done I still loved him, still wanted him, still hoped somehow this was all a mistake. But mostly I cried because I needed time to process, to think, to decide what to do. Because in that moment, a part of me died. The part that believed in happy endings. The part that trusted blindly and loved unconditionally. The part that thought love was enough, that if you just loved someone hard enough and were good enough and supportive enough, they'd love you back the same way. That part of me shattered into a million pieces on that bathroom floor, and I knew it would never come back together the same way again. But another part began to be born. A stronger, colder, more determined part. A part that was angry and hurt, and ready to fight back. In the following days, I became an actress. I gave the performance of my life. I pretended nothing had happened, putting on a mask every morning and wearing it all day until I could take it off again in the privacy of my bathroom. I continued smiling at him over breakfast, making his favorite coffee just the way he liked it. 2 sugars, a splash of cream. I asked him how his day had been when he came home from work, listened to him complain about difficult clients and incompetent employees. I even initiated intimacy a few times, because pulling away would have aroused suspicion. And the whole time, inside, I was dying, screaming, planning. But on the surface, I was the same sweet, trusting Jiwoo I'd always been. Because while he thought I was blind, I was investigating, following the digital breadcrumbs he'd left scattered across his phone. The messages had led me to something bigger, something he was desperately trying to hide from everyone, not just from me. His company was bankrupt, not just with financial difficulties, not just experiencing a temporary setback or a rough quarter, but completely destroyed, sustained only by lies and falsified documents and increasingly desperate attempts to keep up appearances. Minjun had deceived investors, promising returns he knew he couldn't deliver. He'd forged contracts with fake companies, creating an elaborate paper trail of businesses that didn't actually exist. He'd diverted funds from one project to pay for another, robbing Peter to pay Paul in an ever-expanding web of financial fraud. It was all there in his emails, in his file downloads, in his private messages to his accountant where he discussed how to massage the numbers and extend the timeline until things settled down. He was living a complete fantasy, a house of cards built on sand. He was still displaying an image of wild success, the luxury car, the expensive suits, the exclusive restaurants, the high-profile events. But behind the scenes, everything was crumbling. Creditors were calling. Investors were asking questions. Auditors were starting to notice discrepancies. And in a matter of weeks, maybe a month at most, it would all come crashing down. The truth would emerge, like it always does eventually. It was inevitable, unavoidable. He was a man on a sinking ship, frantically bailing water while pretending to his passengers that everything was fine. And then, like a gift from fate, came the invitation. He walked into my apartment one evening with that confident smile he wore so well, an envelope of heavy cream paper in his hands, expensive stationery with gold-embossed edges, a party for Gangnam's elite, in the main hall of the Lotte Hotel, one of the most luxurious venues in Seoul. The kind of place where you needed connections just to book a table at the restaurant, let alone rent the entire ballroom. "It's a celebration of the company's new project, Jiwoo," he said, his eyes bright with excitement. Or was it desperation disguised as excitement? A major milestone. All the biggest investors will be there. The press. Everyone who matters in Seoul's business scene. I want you to be beautiful by my side. Wear something stunning. This is important. He kissed my forehead, his lips lingering there like a benediction, as if everything were perfect between us, as if I didn't know about Seo-yeon, as if I didn't know his company was collapsing, as if I were still the same naive woman from 3 years ago who believed every word that came out of his mouth. But I wasn't anymore. That woman was dead, and in her place stood someone new, someone harder, colder, angrier, someone who knew exactly what she was going to do. I spent hours choosing the dress. I went to 3 different stores, trying on dozens of options before I found the right one. A black model, elegant and sophisticated, fitted at the waist and falling to just below my knees. Long sleeves and a modest neckline, nothing flashy or attention-seeking. Classic, timeless, powerful, the kind of dress that commands respect. I spent 2 hours at the salon getting my hair done, styled in soft waves that fell past my shoulders. My makeup was flawless but understated. Glowing skin, defined eyes, nude lips. I put on the diamond earrings he'd given me on our first anniversary, when he'd still been pretending to care. I wanted to be impeccable. Not for him, but for me, because I knew that would be the last night I'd ever spend by his side, and I needed to be strong enough for what was coming. I needed to look the part, the betrayed girlfriend who'd found her spine, the woman who refused to go down quietly. Little did I know that humiliation would be the beginning of my strength. We arrived at the Lotte Hotel as the sun was setting, painting Seoul's sky in streaks of orange and purple and pink, the kind of sunset that should be romantic, but felt apocalyptic instead. The hotel towered above us, all glass and steel and modern architecture, a monument to wealth and power. Valet attendants rushed to open our car doors. Minjun tipped them generously, always putting on a show of having money to spare. The ballroom was on the top floor, accessible only by a special elevator that required a key card. As we rode up, Minjun adjusted his tie in the mirrored walls, checking his reflection, making sure every hair was in place. "Remember to smile," he told me. "Look happy. This is our night. Our night." The words tasted like ashes in my mouth. The elevator doors opened, and we stepped into a vision of wealth that felt obscene. The ballroom sparkled like a universe made of glass and gold and crystal. Giant chandeliers hung from the ceiling, each one probably worth more than I'd earn in a decade, throwing prismatic light in every direction. The walls were covered in silk panels the color of champagne. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over Seoul, the city spreading out below us like a blanket of lights. Men in impeccable suits congregated in groups, their laughter carefully controlled, their postures radiating confidence and power. Women in designer gowns drifted through the space like exotic birds, their jewelry catching the light, their faces perfectly made up. Waiters in crisp white jackets circulated with silver trays, offering champagne and crystal flutes and canapes that looked like tiny works of art. A string quartet played in one corner, filling the space with elegant classical music. Everything was perfectly choreographed, perfectly beautiful, perfectly fake. The air smelled of expensive perfumes layered over one another, of white lilies in huge arrangements on every table, of that indefinable scent of wealth and power, and people who've never had to worry about money. It was suffocating. When I entered hand in hand with Min Jun, I felt eyes turn toward us. Conversations paused mid-sentence, heads swiveled, but the looks weren't admiring. There was something else in them, curiosity mixed with something that looked uncomfortably like pity. Knowing glances exchanged between couples, whispers behind raised hands. I didn't understand immediately why everyone seemed to be looking at me like I was a lamb being led to slaughter. Min Jun squeezed my hand and leaned close to whisper in my ear, "Smile, darling. You look beautiful tonight." His voice was warm, affectionate, exactly like it used to be when he actually cared. The performance was flawless, and I smiled, because I was still playing my part, still pretending I didn't know, still waiting for the right moment. But then I saw her. She was on the other side of the ballroom, and she was impossible to miss. Seo Yan wore a red dress that looked like it had been painted onto her body, fabric that clung to every curve and shimmered under the lights like liquid blood or fire made tangible. The neckline plunged dramatically. Her black hair cascaded over one bare shoulder in glossy waves that had clearly been professionally styled. Her makeup was dramatic. Red lips to match the dress, eyes lined in sharp wings, contouring that made her face look almost otherworldly. She was beautiful in that calculated, ruthless way that some women perfect. Beautiful like a knife. And she was hanging on the arm of a man in an expensive gray suit, laughing at something he'd said, her hand resting possessively on his bicep. A man I knew very well, Min Jun. Not the Min Jun standing beside me, but a projected image of him on a massive screen at the back of the ballroom, where a promotional video was playing. The success story of Han Corporation proclaimed the title in elegant script, and as I watched, frozen in place, the video showed image after image of Min Jun at various events, at ribbon-cutting ceremonies, at board meetings, and in every recent photo, she was there, Seo Yan, always at his side, always touching him, always smiling that perfect smile. "Meet the team behind Han Corporation's unprecedented growth," the narrator's voice said smoothly. "CEO Min Jun and his partner in business and innovation, Seo Yan." Partner. The word echoed in my head like a gunshot. I felt the ground open beneath my feet, felt gravity reverse, felt everything I'd thought I knew rearrange itself into a new, horrible pattern. Min Jun beside me, the real, physical Min Jun, slowly released my hand. The movement was gradual enough that anyone watching might think it was natural, unconscious, but I felt the intention behind it, the deliberate letting go, like someone setting down a bag they'd been carrying too long, a burden they were ready to be rid of. "I need to go greet some investors," he murmured, already looking away from me, his eyes scanning the room for someone more important. "I'll find you later." And then he walked away, just like that. Left me standing alone in the middle of that glittering ballroom full of strangers, my hand still half raised from where he'd been holding it seconds before. I watched him cross the room, watched him approach her, watched her light up when she saw him, watched them embrace, his hands on her waist, her arms around his neck, watched them kiss, not a quick peck, but a real kiss, intimate and familiar, the kind of kiss that spoke of countless other kisses, of bodies that knew each other well. And every eye in that ballroom turned from them to me, watching for my reaction, waiting to see what the pathetic girlfriend would do now that she'd been publicly replaced. And then it happened. The video ended. The screen went dark for a moment, and then a photographer called out, "Can we get a photo of the happy couple?" Flashes exploded like fireworks. The press surged forward, cameras raised, shouting questions. "Min Jun, Seo Yan, over here. How long have you been together? When did the partnership become romantic? Are there wedding plans?" The master of ceremonies, an older man in a tuxedo who seemed to be enjoying the drama, took the microphone at the front of the room. His voice boomed over the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, we'd like to formally introduce Han Corporation's power couple, CEO Min Jun and his partner in business and in life, Seo Yan. Let's give them a round of applause as they share a few words about the exciting new direction the company is taking. The room erupted in applause. Polite, practiced applause from people who didn't care about the truth, who just wanted to be seen supporting whoever was currently on top. Minjun and Seoyeon walked to the stage, hand in hand, waving like royalty. She was beaming. He looked proud, triumphant, like a man who'd won something valuable. They took the microphone together, and he began to speak about vision and innovation and the future of Han Corporation. And I stood there at the back of the room, holding a glass of champagne that I didn't remember picking up, trying to breathe, trying not to cry, trying to figure out how to exist in a world where this was happening. A woman in a silver dress appeared beside me, her voice low and sympathetic. "I'm so sorry, dear. I didn't know he'd... Well, I thought someone would have warned you. This is cruel, even for him." Another woman joined us, older, with kind eyes. "He's always been like this," she said quietly. "Uses people and discards them when they're no longer useful. My daughter dated him years ago. He did the same thing to her. Their pity was like acid. It burned worse than the betrayal itself." I grabbed another glass of champagne from a passing waiter, drank it in one long swallow, feeling the alcohol burn down my throat, but doing nothing to numb the pain. I grabbed another, and another. My head was spinning, my vision blurring at the edges, but I didn't care. Maybe if I drank enough I could forget this was happening. Maybe I could wake up and find out it was all a nightmare. On stage, Minjun was still talking, his arm around Seoyeon's waist, pulling her close. "And I have to thank my incredible partner here," he was saying, smiling down at her adoringly. "None of this would be possible without her vision, her dedication, her unwavering support. She's the real genius behind our recent success." The words felt like physical blows, because those were the words he used to say about me. That script had been mine once. Now it belonged to her. And it was in that moment, standing there with my fourth glass of champagne in my hand and mascara probably running down my face, that something inside me changed. Not slowly, not gradually, but all at once, like a switch being flipped. The grief and pain and humiliation didn't disappear. They were still there, a weight in my chest that made it hard to breathe. But something else rose up beside them, something cold and clear and sharp as broken glass. Rage. Not the hot, screaming kind of rage. Not the kind that makes you do stupid things you'll regret later, but a cold, calculated fury that brings absolute clarity, that burns away all the confusion and self-doubt and fear, leaving only purpose. I remembered the messages on his phone, the falsified documents I'd found in his email, the evidence of fraud that I'd been secretly collecting for weeks, forwarding to my own email account every time he left his laptop unattended. All the proof of who he really was, what he'd really done. To me, to his investors, to everyone stupid enough to trust him. He didn't just betray me. He'd been planning this moment. This public humiliation had been deliberate, bringing me here, to this event, knowing she would be here, knowing she would be introduced as his partner. He'd wanted me to see it, had wanted to parade his new woman in front of me, in front of everyone, had wanted to make it clear that I was being discarded, replaced with something better. Why? Because it fit his narrative. The struggling entrepreneur who'd had to make hard choices, who'd had to move on from a relationship that wasn't serving him, who'd found true partnership with someone who understood his vision. It made him look decisive, powerful, unencumbered by sentiment. It made me look like the sad ex-girlfriend who hadn't been enough. But he'd made one critical mistake. He'd assumed I was too sweet, too meek, too pathetically in love to fight back. He was about to learn how wrong he was. I set down my champagne glass and smoothed my dress, wiped under my eyes to fix my makeup, took a deep breath and held it, feeling my heart beat slow, feeling that cold fury settle into something solid and unshakable. Then I walked toward the stage. People moved aside as I approached, creating a path. I could feel their eyes on me, hear whispers following in my wake. Is she going to make a scene? Oh God. Someone should stop her. This is going to be awkward. Let them watch. Minjun was wrapping up his speech, thanking various people by name, basking in applause. The master of ceremonies was preparing to announce the toast, reaching for a glass of champagne. And now, if everyone would raise their glasses, I climbed the steps to the stage before anyone could stop me. My heels clicked loudly against the polished wood. The the sound echoing in the suddenly quiet room. The music had stopped. Conversations had died. Every single person in that ballroom was looking at me now. Minjun's face went through a rapid series of emotions. Confusion, shock, fear, then a forced smile as he tried to regain control. "Jiwoo, what are you—" I took the microphone from the master of ceremonies' hand. He started to protest, but something in my face made him back away. "Good evening," I said. My voice came out steady, clear, amplified through the speakers so that every person in that vast room could hear me perfectly. "My name is Jiwoo. Many of you might know me as Minjun's girlfriend, or perhaps you don't know me at all." I smiled, and even I could feel how cold it was. After all, I've clearly been erased from the narrative tonight. Minjun tried to laugh it off. "Darling, what are you doing? This isn't— I'm telling the truth." I cut him off, my voice sharp as a blade. "Something you've forgotten how to do." The room was dead silent now. Every phone was being pulled out, every camera turning toward the stage. This was going to be all over social media within minutes. Part of me knew I should care about that, but I was way past caring. "For 3 years," I continued, "I stood by this man. I supported his dreams. I believed in him when others doubted. I was there through every late night, every crisis, every moment of stress. I thought we were building something together. I thought I mattered." Seo-yeon was trying to pull Minjun away, whispering urgently, but security hadn't moved yet. They seemed as transfixed as everyone else. But tonight I realized I was just a placeholder, someone to keep his bed warm and his ego fed until someone better came along. I looked directly at Seo-yeon. She'd gone pale, her red lips standing out starkly against her suddenly bloodless face. "I hope you fare better than I did. I hope you're prepared for what happens when you stop being useful." "That's enough," Minjun hissed, reaching for the microphone. But I turned away, keeping it out of his reach. "While you're all toasting to his success tonight, you should know the truth about Han Corporation. The company you think you're investing in, the empire you think you're supporting." I paused, letting the tension build. "It doesn't exist. Not really. Not anymore." Now there were gasps, murmurs rippling through the crowd. "The company is bankrupt," I said clearly, enunciating every word. "Completely insolvent. The investors who thought they were funding the next big thing, your money is gone. The contracts you thought you'd signed, many of them are forged. The financial statements you were shown, falsified." "She's lying!" Minjun shouted, his composure finally cracking. "She's just a bitter ex trying to—" "The evidence is being distributed to your email inboxes as we speak." I talked over him. "Every journalist here, every investor, every person who has a stake in this company. You'll find emails, financial documents, proof of fraud spanning the last 18 months. You'll see exactly what kind of man you've been celebrating tonight. I'd arranged this part days ago. Sent all the evidence to a journalist I'd contacted, a woman who specialized in corporate fraud exposés. She'd verified everything, confirmed it was legitimate, and agreed to help me. In exchange for exclusive rights to the story, she'd promised to send the full documentation to everyone on the guest list at precisely 8:00 p.m. I checked my watch. 8:01 p.m. Right on time, phones all over the room started buzzing. Email notifications, people pulling out their devices, opening attachments, their faces changing as they read. Shock, anger, fear. "No!" someone shouted. "The investment we made last month. It's all here," another voice confirmed, sounding sick. "Transaction records, forged signatures. My God, he's been running a Ponzi scheme." The room erupted, angry voices rising, people surging toward the stage, journalists shouting questions, cameras flashing, security finally moving, but they didn't know who to protect or from whom. Minjun tried one last time to salvage the situation. "This is a misunderstanding. There's no explanation for this," I said quietly, but the microphone carried my words across the chaos. "There's no excuse for what you did. To me. To all of these people. You built your empire on lies, and now it's collapsing exactly the way it deserves to." I set the microphone down on the podium. The sharp crack of it echoed through the sound system. Then I looked at Minjun one last time. Really looked at him. At this man I'd loved so completely, so blindly. His perfect hair was disheveled now, his perfect composure shattered. He looked small suddenly, fragile, human in a way he'd never allowed himself to appear before. "You wanted to humiliate me tonight," I said softly, just to him. our faces close enough that no one else could hear. You wanted to show everyone that you'd moved on to something better, that I was nothing, but you forgot something important. What? He whispered, his voice breaking. That a woman with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous creature in the world. I stepped back, looked at Seo-yeon, who was crying now, her perfect makeup running in black streams down her cheeks as she realized what she'd gotten herself into. Looked at the crowd of wealthy, powerful people who were realizing they'd been conned. Looked at the journalists already typing furiously on their phones, crafting headlines, and I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no triumph, just emptiness and relief. I turned and walked off the stage. The crowd parted to let me through, everyone too shocked to speak. I walked through that glittering ballroom with my head held high, my spine straight, my steps measured and calm, even though my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Behind me, chaos, shouting, the sound of something breaking, security surrounding Min-jun, investors demanding answers, journalists calling their editors. In front of me, the elevator, open, waiting. I stepped inside and pressed the button for the ground floor. As the doors began to close, I caught one last glimpse of the ballroom, of the empire crumbling, of the lies collapsing, of Min-jun surrounded by angry people, his face a mask of panic and disbelief. The doors closed. And only then, in that enclosed space, descending down through the building, did I let myself fall apart. I sank to my knees on the elevator floor, pressed my hands over my mouth, and sobbed. Great heaving sobs that tore through my chest, tears streaming down my face unchecked. My whole body shook. All the pain, all the betrayal, all the grief I'd been holding back for weeks came pouring out, but mixed with the pain was something else. Relief, sweet, overwhelming relief, because I'd done it. I'd told the truth. I'd fought back. I'd refused to be the victim in his story. The elevator reached the ground floor. The doors opened, and I stood up, wiped my face, straightened my dress, and walked out into the night. Outside, Seoul was drenched in rain. The sky had opened up while I was inside, and now water poured down in sheets, drumming on the pavement, turning the streets into rivers. It was the kind of rain that soaks through everything in seconds, cold and relentless. I stood under the hotel awning, watching the rain, breathing in that smell of wet asphalt and ozone. My phone was buzzing in my clutch, probably people calling, texting, wanting to know what had just happened. But I didn't check it, didn't care. A taxi pulled up, and without thinking I ran for it, getting drenched in the 2 seconds it took to reach the car. I collapsed into the back seat, water dripping from my hair and dress, probably ruining the leather seats. The driver looked at me in the rearview mirror, taking in my bedraggled appearance, my smudged makeup, my shaking hands. "Rough night?" he asked gently. I laughed. It came out half sob, half giggle, slightly unhinged. "You have no idea. Where to?" I gave him my address, then changed my mind. "Actually, just drive. Anywhere. I don't care." He nodded and pulled away from the hotel into Seoul's rainy streets. He turned on the radio to a station playing soft music and drove carefully through the downpour, not asking questions, letting me sit in silence and process. I looked out the window, watching the city blur past. Seoul at night in the rain looked different, softer, dreamlike. The lights reflected in puddles and on wet pavement, doubling and tripling, creating a world that felt unreal. And I thought, this is it. This is the end of one life and the beginning of another. Everything I'd built with Min-jun was gone. Our relationship, my image of the future, the person I'd been trying so hard to be, all of it, destroyed. But maybe it needed to be destroyed. Maybe that version of myself, the version who'd been willing to shrink and compromise and accept crumbs, needed to die so someone new could be born. We drove for an hour, maybe more, through Gangnam's neon-lit streets, over the Han River Bridge where I could see the water churning below, through neighborhoods I'd never been to, past buildings and parks, and people hurrying through the rain. Finally, the driver pulled over. "I think you need to go home now," he said, his voice kind. "Tomorrow will be better, or maybe not better, but different, and different is sometimes enough." I paid him, adding a generous tip, and got out. I was in front of my building. The rain had lightened to a drizzle. I looked up at it, at the old concrete structure that had been my home for 2 years, and realized I couldn't stay here. Too many memories, too many ghosts. That night, I packed everything I owned into boxes. Clothes, books, dishes, the few pieces of furniture I cared about. I worked until dawn, systematically erasing every trace of the life I'd lived. Every gift Min-jun had given me went into a garbage bag. The expensive presents, the sentimental items, everything. I didn't want any of it. Didn't want anything that would remind me of who I'd been when I was with him. When the sun rose over Seoul, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I looked at my empty apartment and felt something close to peace. I called a moving company, called my landlord to say I was leaving, and then I bought a one-way ticket to Busan. The train to Busan left Seoul Station at 10 in the morning. I sat by the window, watching the city disappear behind me as we picked up speed. Watched the tall buildings give way to suburbs, then to countryside, green hills rolling past under a sky that was slowly clearing. I didn't know what I was doing, didn't have a plan beyond getting away, but that was okay. For the first time in years, I was doing something just for me, not for Min-jun, not for our relationship, not to maintain an image, just for myself. Busan greeted me with salt air and the cry of seagulls. The sea was vast and gray-blue, stretching to the horizon, and something about all that open water made it easier to breathe. In Seoul, everything had felt closed in, suffocating. But here, with the ocean on one side and mountains on the other, there was room to exist. I rented a tiny apartment near Haeundae Beach. One room, barely bigger than a closet, with a kitchen nook and a bathroom so small you could barely turn around. But it had a window that looked out over the water, and that was enough. The first few weeks were the hardest. I had nothing to do and nowhere to be. No job, no friends in this city, no routine to structure my days. I'd wake up and the day would stretch before me, empty and formless. Sometimes I'd stay in bed until afternoon, staring at the ceiling, trying to find the motivation to exist. I cried a lot, more than I had in Seoul even. It was as if leaving the city had released something in me, broken open a dam I didn't know I'd been holding back. I cried for the relationship I'd lost, for the time I'd wasted, for the person I'd been. But mostly I cried for myself, for all the ways I'd abandoned myself to try to keep someone who was never really mine. The news from Seoul kept coming. Min-jun's scandal was everywhere, on television, in newspapers, all over social media. Han Corporation had collapsed completely within a week. Investors were filing lawsuits. Criminal charges were being prepared, and Min-jun himself had disappeared. Some said he'd fled to Singapore. Others thought maybe Thailand or Vietnam, somewhere without an extradition treaty. Seo-yeon gave a tearful interview claiming she'd been manipulated too, that she hadn't known about the fraud. I watched it on my phone, curled up on my tiny couch, and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, just numbness. My own involvement in exposing the scandal made me briefly famous. Journalists wanted interviews. TV shows wanted me to appear. The woman who brought down Han Corporation, they called me. A modern-day whistleblower. They wanted to make me a hero, a symbol, but I refused all of it. I changed my phone number, deleted my social media accounts, and disappeared into anonymous life in Busan. Because I wasn't a hero. I was just a woman who'd been hurt and had fought back. And now I needed to figure out who I was, when I wasn't defined by him. The turning point came about 6 weeks after my arrival. I was walking along Haeundae Beach at dawn, something I'd started doing most mornings when I couldn't sleep. The beach was empty that early, just me and the gulls and the endless rhythm of waves. The sand was cool and firm under my bare feet. The sky was just starting to lighten, that deep blue of very early morning giving way to pale gray. And as I walked, I noticed a small building near the beachfront, a corner unit in an old building, windows dark and dusty, a for lease sign in faded letters on the door. It couldn't have been more than 400 square feet. The paint was peeling. The doorframe was warped from sea air and age, but something about it called to me. I peered through the dirty windows. Inside was empty space, concrete floor covered in dust, water stains on the ceiling. But the light, the morning light streaming through those big windows was gorgeous, golden and warm and full of possibility, and I had a sudden vivid image of what it could be. Small tables and comfortable chairs, plants hanging in those windows, the smell of fresh coffee, a place where people could come to sit and think and breathe, a refuge from the chaos of their lives. A coffee shop. The idea was absurd. I knew nothing about running a business, had never made professional coffee in my life, had no experience in food service or management or anything remotely related. I had limited savings, no safety net, no backup plan if it failed. But for the first time since leaving Seoul, I felt something other than pain or numbness. I felt hope. I called the number on the sign that same day. The rent was affordable. Barely, but manageable if I was careful. The landlord, an elderly woman who lived upstairs, agreed to let me have it month to month. "You remind me of my daughter," she said, looking at me with soft eyes. "Running from something?" "Running toward something," I corrected, and realized as I said it that it was true. I signed the lease that afternoon. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. I spent every day cleaning and painting, scrubbing years of grime from those beautiful windows. I learned about coffee from YouTube videos and free online courses, practiced making drink after drink in my tiny apartment kitchen until I could pull a decent espresso shot. I found used furniture on secondhand websites, simple wooden tables and mismatched chairs that I sanded and refinished by hand. I bought cheap plants and hung them everywhere, bringing life into the space. My savings dwindled alarmingly fast. Equipment cost more than I'd budgeted. Permits and licenses and insurance ate through my reserves. There were nights I lay awake, calculating and recalculating, wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake, if I should give up and get a regular job while I still could. But every morning, I'd go back to that little space and see it slowly transforming, becoming real. And I'd remember why I was doing this, because I needed to build something that was entirely mine, something no one could take from me. A place that existed because I'd made it exist, not because I was attached to someone powerful. I needed to prove to myself that I could create, not just support someone else's creation. Finally, 3 months after arriving in Busan, I was ready to open. I'd chosen a name weeks earlier, one that felt right in a way I couldn't fully explain. Haerang. In Korean, it means following the sun, or sun's companion. It spoke to what I was trying to do, find my way out of darkness, follow the light, become my own source of warmth rather than depending on someone else's. I made a hand-painted sign, my designer skills finally useful again. Simple, elegant letters in Hangul and English. Hung it above the door with hands that shook slightly, suddenly terrified that I'd fail, that no one would come, that this whole endeavor was just a distraction from dealing with my pain. Opening day was a Thursday in April. The cherry blossoms were blooming along Busan streets, pink petals drifting through the air like snow. I opened the doors at 7 in the morning, the coffee machine already warm, pastries from a local baker arranged in the display case, everything ready. And then I waited. 7:30 came. No customers. 8 o'clock. Still empty. 8:30. I started to panic, checking the coffee temperature obsessively, rearranging pastries, wiping already clean tables. At 9:15, the door finally opened. An elderly man shuffled in, looking around curiously. "You're new," he observed. "Brand new," I confirmed, trying to keep my voice steady. "What can I get you?" He ordered a simple Americano. I made it carefully, hands surprisingly steady now that there was something to do. He took a sip, nodded approvingly. "Good coffee. I'll be back tomorrow." And he was. Every morning at 9:15, like clockwork. Slowly, so slowly I barely noticed it happening. Others came. A university student who needed a quiet place to study, a young mother who brought her toddler and gratefully accepted the comfortable chair I offered her, an artist who asked if she could sit in the corner and sketch. Word spread gradually in that organic way that can't be forced. "There's a nice little coffee shop near Haeundae. The owner is really kind. It has a good energy." Within a few months I had regulars. People who came every day, who had their usual orders, who stayed for hours, and each one brought a story. Divorce and job loss and family problems and heartbreak. Everyone carrying their own pain, looking for a place where they could set it down for a while. I learned to listen, to make coffee and provide a sympathetic ear when needed, quiet presence when words weren't necessary, to create a space that felt safe, where people could be vulnerable without judgment. And somewhere in the process of holding space for others' grief, I began to heal my own. The coffee shop became profitable after 6 months, not wildly successful, but sustainable, enough that I could pay rent and bills and even save a little. I hired Min-ah, a recent graduate who needed work, and had a genuine warmth that customers loved. Together, we made Haerang into something special. But more than the financial stability, more than the satisfaction of building a successful business, what the coffee shop gave me was purpose. I wasn't Minjun's girlfriend anymore, wasn't the woman from the scandal, wasn't defined by what had been done to me. I was Jiwoo, owner of Harangue, someone who made excellent coffee and provided refuge, someone who had survived and rebuilt, someone who was enough, all by herself. One afternoon, about a year after opening, a man in his 50s came in. Well-dressed, kind face, reading glasses perched on his nose. He ordered a latte and sat by the window working on a laptop. After an hour, he approached the counter. "You're Jiwoo, aren't you?" he asked gently. "From the Han Corporation incident?" My stomach dropped. I'd been recognized occasionally, but it had become rare. I'd hoped that part of my life was truly behind me. "Yes," I said quietly, "but I'd prefer not to." "I wanted to thank you," he interrupted. "I had money invested in that company. Not a huge amount, but significant for me. If you hadn't exposed the fraud when you did, I would have invested much more the following week. You saved me from losing everything." I didn't know what to say. "What you did took incredible courage," he continued. "Not just exposing the truth, but surviving what came after. Building this," he gestured around the coffee shop, "creating something good from something painful. That's real strength." After he left, I stood behind the counter for a long time, his words echoing in my head. I hadn't thought of it as strength. I'd thought of it as survival, as doing the only thing I could do in an impossible situation. But maybe they were the same thing. That evening, after closing, I sat on the beach and watched the sun set over the sea. The sky turned incredible shades of orange and pink and purple. Clouds lit from below like they were on fire. Waves rolled in endlessly, that rhythm that had become as familiar as my own heartbeat. And I realized I was happy. Not the delirious fairy tale happiness I'd once imagined. Not the happiness of finding the perfect man and living the perfect life, but something better, something real. The happiness of knowing yourself, of liking who you are, of building a life that belongs to you alone. I still thought about Minjun sometimes. Wondered where he was, if he ever thought about me, if he understood what he'd destroyed. But those thoughts came less frequently now, with less pain attached. He was my past. Important, formative, necessary in some way I was still understanding. But he wasn't my present or my future. Those belonged to me. 2 years after that night at the Lotte Hotel, I can say with complete honesty that I'm grateful for what happened. Not grateful to Minjun. He doesn't deserve my gratitude. But grateful for the journey his betrayal forced me to take. Grateful for the strength I discovered in myself. Grateful for the life I built from the ashes of what I'd lost. Harangue is thriving now. We've expanded slightly, adding a small patio area where customers can sit outside and watch the ocean. We host poetry readings on Friday nights and art shows from local artists on our walls. It's become more than a coffee shop. It's a community space, a refuge for people who need one. I've made friends here, real friends, based on who I actually am, rather than who I'm connected to. People who know my story, but don't define me by it. Who see me as Jiwoo the coffee shop owner, Jiwoo the friend, Jiwoo the person, not Jiwoo the scandal, Jiwoo the victim. I've even started dating again, carefully and slowly. Nothing serious yet, but I'm open to the possibility. And when I do eventually fall in love again, it will be from a place of wholeness, not need. I won't be looking for someone to complete me, because I'm already complete on my own. The news about Minjun has dried up. Last I heard, he was in Singapore, working under a different name, trying to rebuild. Some part of me hopes he's learned something, become a better person, but mostly I don't think about him at all, because he's not part of my story anymore. He was a chapter, painful, difficult, necessary for teaching me what I needed to learn, but not the conclusion. The conclusion is this: me, at peace, building something meaningful, helping others, growing into the person I was always meant to be. If you're reading this and going through something similar, please know, it gets better. Not immediately, not easily. There will be days when you feel like you're drowning, when the pain is so overwhelming you can't imagine surviving it, but you will survive. And on the other side of that pain is a version of yourself that's stronger, wiser, more authentic than you ever thought possible. The greatest act of revenge isn't destroying the person who hurt you. It's building such a beautiful life without them that they become irrelevant. It's choosing yourself every single day, even when it's hard. It's learning that you don't need anyone's approval or love or validation to be worthy. You are enough. You always were. It just took losing someone who couldn't see that to help you see it yourself. Today, when I wake up and open the windows of my apartment above the coffee shop, I hear the ocean and smell the salt air and feel the sun on my face. And I think, I made it. Against all odds, through all the pain, I made it to the other side. And if I can do it, so can you. Have you loved someone who slowly destroyed you? Someone who made you doubt everything about yourself? If you have, drop a heart in the comments. Let's remind each other that we're not alone in this, that pain is universal, but so is the ability to heal from it. And if you're still in the middle of your pain, comment, "I will make it." Say it out loud. Make it real. Because you will. I promise you will. In Korea, there's a saying, even the longest winter eventually ends. And it's true. Even when you're in the depths of cold and darkness and can't imagine ever feeling warm again, spring always comes. Always. My winter lasted 3 years. The coldest, darkest years of my life. But I came through it. And now I'm in spring. And the world is beautiful again. Your spring is coming too. Hold on. I don't know if Minjun ever thinks about that night. If he ever regrets how he handled things. If he's sorry for the pain he caused. Part of me doubts it. People like him rarely do the self-reflection necessary for true regret. But it doesn't matter anymore. His story and mine diverged that night. He chose lies and fled from consequences. I chose truth and stayed to face what came. And 2 years later, I'm the one who's genuinely happy, while he's hiding halfway across the world, afraid of his own shadow. That's not revenge. It's just the natural consequence of our choices. He chose to destroy. I chose to build. And in the end, building always wins. So if this story touched you, if you saw yourself in it, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because there are so many people out there who are where I was 2 years ago, thinking they're alone, thinking they'll never recover, thinking they're not enough. And they need to know the truth. You are enough. You always were, and you always will be. The person who couldn't see that, that's their failure, not yours. And when you finally understand that truth in your bones, when you finally choose yourself the way you used to choose them, that's when everything changes. That's when you start to bloom. In the cold of betrayal, in the darkness of despair, in the depths of humiliation. That's where I finally bloomed, and so will you.